In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that has echoed through millennia: strength determines survival. The Galactic Council, a sprawling confederation of hundreds of advanced species, has long operated under this principle. Their warriors are bred for perfection, enhanced through genetics, augmented with technology, trained from birth in the arts of war and conquest. For 3,000 years, this system has maintained order across the galaxy. The strongest species rule, the weakest serve, and the natural hierarchy flows as smoothly as starlight through the void. Every species knows their place, accepts their role, and the galaxy turns in predictable harmony. Then, humanity arrived. Not with the thunderous roar of conquest fleets or the calculated precision of diplomatic envoys, but stumbling through a damaged wormhole in ships held together by desperation and ingenuity. They were refugees, survivors of a dying world, carrying nothing but hope and an inexplicable refusal to accept defeat. The Council's initial assessment was swift and dismissive. Humans were weak, their technology primitive, their bodies fragile. By every measure that mattered, they ranked among the lowest-tier species, suitable perhaps for menial labor, certainly not for anything requiring true strength or intelligence. But the Council had made their calculations based on muscle mass and energy output, on genetic purity and technological advancement. They had measured everything except the one quality that would shatter their understanding of what it meant to be strong. They had never encountered a species that fought not because they were the biggest or the strongest or the most advanced, but because they had something worth fighting for. They had never met warriors who grew stronger not through enhancement or augmentation, but through the simple, terrifying alchemy of refusing to give up. In the great arena of galactic civilization, humanity was about to teach the universe that there are different breeds of warriors, and, sometimes, the most dangerous ones are those who fight with their hearts instead of their genes. The stars themselves would remember what happened next. The observation deck of the Galactic Council station Nexus Prime stretched across nearly a kilometer of reinforced crystal, offering a view of the galaxy's diplomatic heart that never failed to inspire awe in visiting dignitaries. Ambassador Zethkar of the Valerian Empire stood at the viewing port, his forearms crossed behind his back, watching the endless stream of ships arriving and departing from the massive station. Each vessel represented one of the galaxy's countless species, all bound together under the Council's iron rule of natural hierarchy. Zethkar's species, the Valorians, had earned their place among the galaxy's elite through 3 millennia of careful genetic engineering and technological advancement. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect plasma fire and enhanced musculature capable of crushing steel, they embodied the Council's ideals of perfection. They were warriors born, shaped by evolution and science into the ultimate soldiers. "The humans have arrived," announced his aide, Crixtal, her voice carrying the precise modulation that marked her as one of the enhanced telepathic castes. "Their delegation is requesting immediate audience with the High Council." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his people. Requesting? How quaint. Do they understand they are not here to negotiate but to receive their assignment? 3 weeks earlier, the humans had emerged from a collapsing wormhole in the outer rim, their small fleet of ships barely functional, their crew exhausted and desperate. The initial contact reports had been almost laughably dismissive. Humans stood barely 2 meters tall on average, with soft flesh that could be punctured by the simplest weapons, no natural armor, no enhanced abilities, and technology that would have been considered primitive by Council standards 500 years ago. The Council's classification system was ruthlessly efficient. Species were ranked on a scale from alpha to epsilon based on their physical capabilities, technological advancement, mental acuity, and martial prowess. Alphas like the Valorians and the crystalline Nexari ruled the galaxy. Betas like the shapeshifting Morphids and the psychic Zentrans served as administrators and specialists. Gammas handled mid-level functions, deltas performed basic labor, and epsilons existed primarily as a genetic reservoir for the upper castes. Humans had been classified as delta-. They would serve as manual laborers, perhaps showing some aptitude for basic maintenance and agricultural work. It was a generous classification, considering their obvious limitations. The delegation consists of 5 individuals, Crixtal continued, her mental probe having already analyzed the approaching humans. Their leader appears to be a female called Sarah Chen, approximately 45 standard years old, showing signs of stress but maintaining remarkable psychological stability despite their circumstances. Curious. Zethkar turned from the viewport, his attention caught by something in his aide's tone. Curious how? Their mental patterns are unusual. Most species facing classification by the Council show predictable responses: fear, submission, calculation of how to best serve their new position in the hierarchy. The humans show none of these. They appear to be angry. The concept was so alien that Zethkar required a moment to process it. Anger was the province of the desperate and the doomed. No rational species would approach the Council with anything but respectful submission, particularly when they were so obviously outmatched in every measurable way. Perhaps they do not understand their situation, he mused. No matter. The Council chamber will educate them quickly enough. The Grand Council chamber was a marvel of engineering and psychology, designed to reinforce the natural order through its very architecture. The chamber was a massive sphere, its walls lined with seats arranged in strict hierarchical order. The Alphas occupied the highest tier, their elevated positions allowing them to look down upon all others. Each descending level housed the next classification, with the lowest tier reserved for those seeking the Council's judgment. As Zethkar took his place among the Alpha representatives, he observed the human delegation entering the chamber. They moved with a peculiar gait, not the careful, measured steps of those showing proper respect, but something closer to what his military training identified as a combat advance. Their leader, Sarah Chen, walked point with her head held high, her eyes scanning the assembled representatives not with awe or submission, but with the cold assessment of someone identifying potential threats. High Counselor Vextar, an ancient Nexary whose crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights and patterns that spoke of ultimate authority, activated the translation matrix with a thought. His voice resonated through the chamber with the weight of 3,000 years of unquestioned rule. Humans of the recently discovered Terra system, you stand before the Galactic Council to receive classification and assignment within our great civilization. Your species has been evaluated according to our standard metrics, and you have been found suitable for Delta-class service roles. You will be relocated to appropriate facilities where your people can contribute to galactic society in accordance with your capabilities. The silence that followed was not the respectful acceptance the Council expected. Instead, Sarah Chen took a single step forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. With respect, High Counselor, we decline. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In 3,000 years of Council history, no species had ever declined their classification. The concept itself was meaningless, one did not decline gravity or the passage of time. Classification was a fact, not a choice. Vextar's crystalline form shifted through patterns of confusion and disbelief. Explain the meaning of your words, human. We are not livestock to be classified and assigned, Sarah replied, her tone remaining level despite the obvious tension rippling through the chamber. We came to this galaxy seeking refuge, not masters. We're grateful for your initial assistance, but we will not accept servitude as payment for survival. A low rumble of what might have been amusement rippled through the Alpha tier. The Valerian Grand Marshal, Thorake the Unbroken, rose from his seat, his massive form casting shadows across the lower levels. Human, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 victories, you speak from ignorance. The Council's classification system is not negotiable. It is based on objective measurement of capability and potential. Your species lacks the physical strength, technological advancement, or mental capacity for higher classification. This is not opinion, it is fact. Facts can be misleading, Sarah responded, and now there was something in her voice that made Zethkar lean forward in his seat. Your evaluation measured our bodies, our technology, our processing speed. But you missed something important. And what might that be? Vextar inquired, his patterns now showing the faintest hints of curiosity beneath the authority. You never asked what we're willing to die for. The chamber fell silent. Even the automatic systems seemed to pause in their cycling. The question was so unexpected, so outside the framework of normal classification parameters, that for a moment no one quite knew how to respond. Thorake recovered first, his mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among his people. Die for? Child, your willingness to die is irrelevant. The strong survive, the weak perish or serve. This is the natural order. Your personal feelings about death do not alter your species' physical limitations. Don't they? Sarah gestured to her companions, and, for the first time, the council representatives took a closer look at the human delegation. They were not, as initially assumed, the finest examples of their species. Two showed obvious signs of injury, their movements careful and pained. One was clearly past her physical prime, her hair gray and her movements slow. Another appeared to be barely out of adolescence by human standards. 3 days ago, our ship the Providence was attacked by raiders near the Sigma Centauri system, Sarah continued. 12 ships against our one, commanded by a Beta-class species with technology superior to ours in every way. They demanded our surrender and threatened to execute our civilians if we resisted. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. My tactical officer here, James Reeves, coordinated our defense despite having 3 broken ribs and a concussion from an earlier engineering accident. Our pilot, Maria Santos, flew evasion patterns for 6 hours straight despite being 72 years old and suffering from a degenerative nerve condition that should have grounded her years ago. Our engineer, Tommy Park, kept our weapons online by crawling through damaged conduits filled with plasma radiation that would have killed most species in minutes. The chamber was absolutely silent now, every representative listening with the focused attention usually reserved for direct threats to their own safety. Our communications officer, Lisa Wright, maintained contact with our civilian transports while coordinating point defense systems, despite the fact that she was 17 years old and had never seen combat before in her life. And I held our formation together and made the tactical decisions that saved our convoy despite knowing that if I failed, everyone I've ever cared about would die. Sarah's voice never rose, never broke, but something in it made even the Alpha-tier representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. We destroyed 7 of their ships and damaged the rest badly enough that they retreated. We did this not because we were stronger or faster or more advanced than our enemies. We did it because we had something worth protecting, and we were willing to pay any price to protect it. Your evaluation never measured that. High Counselor Vextar's patterns shifted to configurations that hadn't been seen in the council chamber for centuries: uncertainty, confusion, and something that might have been recognition. Your point is noted, human, but anecdotal evidence does not alter fundamental classifications. One fortunate engagement does not. It wasn't fortunate, Sarah interrupted, a breach of protocol so severe that several Alpha representatives half rose from their seats. It was inevitable. Because when you have something worth fighting for, you don't fight until you win. You fight until you can't fight anymore. And then, you fight some more. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species, and, for a moment, Zethkar felt something he had never experienced in his enhanced, genetically perfect existence. He felt a chill of recognition, as if he was looking at something that his warrior's instincts recognized even if his enhanced intellect could not categorize it. Your classification system measures everything except the most important factor in any conflict: how much you're willing to sacrifice for victory. You've bred warriors who are perfect in every way except the one that matters. You've created soldiers who know how to fight, but who have forgotten why fighting matters. The chamber erupted into chaos as representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, some demanding immediate punishment for the human's insolence, others calling for clarification of her statements, still others voicing confusion at concepts that seemed to exist outside their understanding. Through it all, Sarah Chen stood motionless at the center of the storm, her 4 companions arranged behind her in what Zethkar's tactical training suddenly recognized as a defensive formation. They were prepared to fight, here in the heart of galactic civilization, surrounded by beings who could destroy them with a thought. They were prepared to die rather than submit. And, for the first time in 3,000 years of perfect order, the Galactic Council found itself facing a problem that could not be solved by measuring muscle mass or evaluating technology. They were facing a species that fought with something their classification system had no metric for: the human heart. High Counselor Vextar raised one crystalline appendage, and, gradually the chamber fell silent. His patterns were cycling through configurations that hadn't been seen since the early days of the Council, when such things as unpredictability and chaos still existed in galactic civilization. Human Sarah Chen, he said finally, you present us with concepts that require consideration. The Council will deliberate on your words. You and your delegation will be housed in the diplomatic quarter while we discuss the implications of your statements. We appreciate your courtesy, Sarah replied, but we're not staying. Another wave of shock rippled through the chamber. No species left the council station without permission. No one rejected the council's hospitality. It simply wasn't done. Explain, Vextar demanded. Our people are waiting for us in the Outer Rim. They're building new homes, starting new lives, trying to heal from the loss of our homeworld. They need to know that we're free, that we haven't traded one form of destruction for another. We'll return in 30 days for your answer. Until then, we remain free and independent. And if the council's answer is unacceptable to you? Thorake asked, his voice carrying the implicit threat that had ended 1,000 smaller civilizations. Sarachin smiled, and Zethkar realized that he was looking at the most dangerous expression he had ever seen. It wasn't the cold calculation of a predator or the mad fury of a berserker. It was something far worse. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had already counted the cost and found it acceptable. Then, you'll find out exactly how dangerous a species can be when they're fighting for something they love more than their own lives. The human delegation turned and walked from the chamber, their movements unhurried, their formation maintained. They left behind them a council that had ruled the galaxy for 3 millennia, and, for the first time in all those years, no one was quite certain what would happen next. As the great doors sealed behind the humans, Zethkar found himself staring at the space where they had stood, trying to process what he had just witnessed. In all his years as a warrior, in all his campaigns and conquests, he had fought enemies who were stronger, faster, more advanced. He had never fought an enemy who was more willing to die. The question that would haunt the council for the next 30 days hung in the recycled air of the great chamber. How do you defeat someone who fights not to win, but to protect what they love? The galaxy was about to find out that some breeds of warriors could not be measured by any scale the universe had ever devised. The emergency session of the Alpha Council convened in the secure chambers deep within Nexus Prime, far from the diplomatic quarters where lesser species might overhear their deliberations. The room itself was a testament to the Council's power, walls of pure energy contained within force fields, furniture that adjusted automatically to accommodate the varied physiologies of the galaxy's apex predators, and environmental controls that could shift atmosphere, gravity, and temperature at will to ensure each representative operated at peak efficiency. Grand Marshal Thorake paced the chamber's perimeter with the restless energy of a caged predator, his crystalline exoskeleton catching and reflecting the chamber's soft lighting in patterns that spoke of barely contained aggression. The human delegation's words had struck something deep in his warrior's psyche, something that his enhanced intellect struggled to process but his combat instincts recognized as a potential threat. They are playing a game they cannot possibly win, he declared, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 successful campaigns. 5 fragile biologicals challenging the combined might of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. It is either supreme arrogance or complete insanity. Ambassador Zethkar found himself in the unusual position of disagreeing with his superior. Since the humans had departed 3 hours ago, he had been analyzing every detail of their encounter, running tactical simulations and psychological profiles through his enhanced cognitive systems. The results were disturbing. Perhaps, he ventured carefully, but their tactical assessment of the situation may be more sophisticated than we initially assumed. They demonstrated detailed knowledge of our classification system, our hierarchical structure, and our standard protocols. This was not an emotional outburst, it was a calculated challenge. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline form shifted through patterns of deep contemplation, his ancient mind processing data streams that would overwhelm lesser beings. As the oldest member of the Council, he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species, had seen empires that span star systems crumble at the first sign of true adversity. The concern is not whether they can defeat us in conventional terms, he said, his mental voice resonating through the translation matrix with the weight of 3 millennia of experience. The concern is what their defiance represents. If one species can reject classification, others may follow. The natural order that has maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years could collapse. The statement hung in the air like a gravitational anomaly, warping the normal flow of discussion. The Council's system worked precisely because it was accepted as natural law. Species found their place in the hierarchy and remained there, content with their roles, contributing to the greater good according to their abilities. The strong protected the weak, the intelligent guided the simple, and the galaxy functioned with clockwork precision. Commander Zelnara of the Apex Hunters leaned forward, her predatory instincts focused with laser intensity on the problem at hand. Her species had evolved on a world where everything was either predator or prey, and they had claimed their place among the alphas through 3 million years of never being anything but the apex predators. The humans spoke of fighting for something beyond survival, she observed, her voice carrying the deadly quiet of a stalking hunter. This concept requires analysis. In nature, all conflict serves one of 3 purposes: territory, resources, or reproduction. What else could be worth the risk of death? Zethkar accessed his cultural database, searching through the psychological profiles of thousands of species. What he found was disturbing in its implications. Love, he said finally. They spoke of protecting what they love. This appears to be a central organizing principle of their species, one that supersedes individual survival imperatives. The silence that followed was profound. Love as a survival mechanism was not unknown in the galaxy. Many species formed pair bonds or pack structures that enhanced their effectiveness. But love is something worth dying for, love is something that could motivate suicidal defiance of overwhelming odds, was completely outside the Council's experience. Grand Marshal Thorake stopped his pacing and turned to face the assembled representatives, his massive form radiating the confidence that had carried him through 1,000 battles. Then, we eliminate the object of their love, he declared with the simple directness of a born warrior. Their fleet in the Outer Rim contains approximately 50,000 humans. We demonstrate the futility of their position by destroying half of them. The survivors will accept classification to preserve what remains. No, Vexstar's response carried such force that the chamber's environmental systems automatically adjusted to compensate for the energy fluctuations from his emotional state. That path leads to chaos. If we begin executing civilians to enforce compliance, we shatter the foundational principle that the Council protects all species. We become predators rather than guardians. Then, what do you propose? Thorake demanded. We cannot allow them to simply depart. Their defiance must be answered, or every species in the galaxy will begin to question their classification. Zethkar found himself speaking before he had fully processed the implications of his words. We test them. The chamber fell silent, all attention focused on him. He felt the weight of their scrutiny but pressed on, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. The humans claim that their willingness to sacrifice transcends physical limitations. They assert that fighting for love makes them more dangerous than fighting for conquest or survival. This is a testable hypothesis. Commander Zelnara's hunting instinct sharpened. Explain. We challenge their champion to individual combat against one of our finest warriors. If their philosophy has merit, their representative should be able to defeat a superior opponent through sheer determination. If not, their defeat will demonstrate the futility of their position to their own people and to any other species considering similar defiance. Thorake's mandibles clicked in approval. Combat. Yes, this returns us to familiar ground. Let them send their finest warrior against mine. When their champion falls, their defiance ends. But Vexstar's pattern shifted to configurations of deep concern. And if their champion wins? The question hung in the air like an unexploded weapon. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no Delta-class species had ever defeated an Alpha-class warrior in individual combat. It was physically impossible, the genetic and technological advantages were simply too overwhelming. But, then, no Delta-class species had ever claimed that the rules of physics were less important than the contents of their hearts. Impossible, Thorake declared. I will stand as the Council's champion myself. Enhanced strength, augmented reflexes, 3,000 years of combat experience, and weapons forged from the heart of dying stars. No human warrior can match that. Zethkar nodded slowly, working through the tactical implications. The combat would serve multiple purposes. It would demonstrate the natural order to any species considering defiance, it would resolve the human situation without requiring us to resort to genocide, and it would do so in a way that reinforces rather than undermines Council authority. And the rules of engagement? Zelnara inquired. Standard arena protocols, Thorake replied. Personal weapons and armor only, no external technological enhancement beyond what the combatants normally carry, victory by death or surrender. Clean, simple, decisive. High Counselor Vexstar's ancient mind processed the proposal through 1,000 different scenarios, analyzing political ramifications, strategic implications, and the potential for unintended consequences. The arena had been used to settle disputes between alpha species for millennia, its traditions dating back to the earliest days of the Council. No one had ever questioned the legitimacy of its judgments. Very well, he decided finally. We will extend this offer to the humans when they return in 30 days. Single combat between champions, with the outcome determining their species classification. If they win, they receive alpha status and full membership in the Council. If they lose, they accept Delta classification without further resistance. The terms were so favorable to the humans that even suggesting them bordered on insanity. Alpha status was reserved for species that had proven themselves capable of ruling entire sectors of the galaxy. It came with territory, resources, and authority that most civilizations could only dream of. The Council was offering to stake its entire hierarchical system on the outcome of a single fight. The stakes seemed disproportionate, Zethkar observed carefully. Vexstar's pattern shifted to something that might have been amusement if such emotions were possible in crystalline beings. They are proportionate to the threat. If the humans can defeat our finest warrior through willpower alone, then our entire understanding of strength and weakness requires revision. If not, the demonstration will be so decisive that no species will ever again question the natural order. Commander Zelnara leaned back, her predatory instincts satisfied by the elegant simplicity of the solution. And, you believe they will accept these terms? They must, Thor AK declared. They have made claims about the superiority of their philosophy. We are offering them the chance to prove those claims under controlled conditions. To refuse would expose their words as empty bravado. The discussion continued for several more hours, working out the technical details of the combat, the specific rules of engagement, and the protocols for ensuring that the entire galaxy witnessed the outcome. By the time the session concluded, they had created a framework that would either validate 3 millennia of galactic civilization or shatter it completely. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the human fleet maintained its position in the outer rim, unaware that their fate would soon rest on the outcome of a single combat between champions. Their ships were a motley collection of civilian transports, converted cargo haulers, and repurposed mining vessels, none designed for war, all pressed into service by necessity when their homeworld began its final death spiral. Captain Sarachan stood in the observation deck of the flagship Providence, staring out at the constellation of human ships scattered across several light minutes of space. Each vessel contained families, children, elderly refugees who had lost everything except their determination to build new lives among the stars. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and artists, people who had never wanted to be warriors but who had learned to fight when fighting was the only alternative to extinction. Her second-in-command, James Reeves, joined her at the viewport, his movements still careful due to his healing ribs. The engagement with the raiders had been their first real test since leaving Earth, and they had passed it, but the cost had been significant. 3 ships damaged, 17 people wounded, 4 dead. Small numbers by military standards, but each casualty had been someone's parent, spouse, or child. The engineering teams are making good progress, he reported. Another weekend, we'll have the Providence's primary weapons back to full capacity. The civilian ships are installing the defensive upgrades as quickly as they can manage. Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on the wider strategic picture. Their encounter with the Galactic Council had been inevitable. They needed resources, navigation data, and safe passage to establish their new colony. But the price the Council demanded was too high. They hadn't escaped the death of their homeworld just to become slaves in a new system. Any word from our scouting missions? She asked. Tommy's team found 3 potentially habitable systems within our range, all unoccupied. The best candidate is about 8 light-years from here, a G-class star with 2 planets that could support human life with minimal terraforming. Sarah turned from the viewport to face him, noting the concern in his expression. James had been her tactical officer for 6 years, and she had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when he was wrestling with a problem he didn't want to voice directly. "What's bothering you?" "The Council," he replied without hesitation. That wasn't a negotiation we just walked away from, it was a declaration of war. They've ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years, and we just told them their authority doesn't apply to us. They're not going to let that stand. Sarah had been thinking the same thing during the long journey back to their fleet. The Galactic Council's power was absolute, built on the foundation that every species knew and accepted their place in the hierarchy. Their defiance threatened the entire system, and systems that had endured for millennia didn't change without a fight. We knew this was a possibility when we made our choice, she said finally. The question is whether we're ready for what comes next. Are we talking about running? Finding some corner of the galaxy where the Council doesn't reach? Sarah shook her head. There is no such place. The Council's authority extends everywhere that matters. Running would just delay the confrontation, not avoid it. And it would mean living as fugitives, always looking over our shoulders, always wondering when they would finally track us down. Then, what's the alternative? Sarah looked back out at the human fleet, at the ships carrying 50,000 people who had trusted her to lead them to safety and freedom. They had followed her across impossible distances, had fought raiders and mechanical failures and the endless dangers of deep space. They had done all this because they believed in her promise that somewhere among the stars, they could build new homes where their children would grow up free. We prove our point, she said quietly. We show the galaxy that there are different kinds of strength, different reasons to fight. We demonstrate that love is more powerful than enhancement, that determination can overcome technology, that the human spirit is worth more than all their genetic perfection. James was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of her words. You're talking about war with the entire Galactic Council. I'm talking about changing the rules of the game, Sarah corrected. The Council measures strength in ways that favor them: size, technology, genetic enhancement. But strength isn't just about what you can lift or how fast your reflexes are. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to endure, what you refuse to abandon no matter how dark things get. She turned to face him fully, and James saw in her eyes the same quiet determination that had carried them through every crisis since leaving Earth. The Council is about to learn something that they've forgotten in their 3,000 years of perfect order. They're about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones fighting not to conquer, but to protect. And, when you're fighting to protect what you love, surrender isn't an option. In the depths of space, two civilizations prepared for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of strength, weakness, and what it truly meant to be a warrior. The Council prepared with the confidence of absolute technological and genetic superiority. Humanity prepared with something far more dangerous, the knowledge that some things are worth more than life itself. The arena was waiting, and the galaxy would soon learn which breed of warrior truly deserved to inherit the stars. 27 days after the humans departed Nexus Prime, long-range sensors detected their return. The single ship that emerged from hyperspace was not the diplomatic shuttle they had arrived in, but something that made the station's defense coordinators pause in confusion. The vessel was clearly human in design, but it had been modified in ways that defied conventional understanding. Ambassador Zethkar studied the tactical readouts from the command center, his enhanced cognitive systems processing data streams faster than most organic minds could follow. The human ship showed signs of recent combat: scorch marks along the hull, hastily welded patches over what appeared to be breach points, and energy signatures that suggested their weapons had been fired repeatedly in the past week. They fought someone, observed Commander Zelnara, her predatory instincts immediately identifying the damage patterns. Recently. Multiple engagements. Zethkar nodded, his tactical mind already working through the implications. Our intelligence reports indicated 3 separate raider fleets operating in that sector. All of them have gone silent in the past 10 days. The implications hung in the air like an unexploded weapon. Raider fleets didn't simply go silent, they were eliminated, scattered, or absorbed by larger forces. The human fleet in the Outer Rim was too small to absorb anyone, and raiders didn't scatter without a fight. That left only one possibility. Impossible, Grand Marshal Thor AK declared when the reports reached him. A single human ship against 3 raider fleets? Even enhanced Alpha-class warships would struggle with those odds. But the evidence was undeniable. The human vessel approaching Nexus Prime carried the energy signatures of weapons discharge, the structural damage of sustained combat, and, most tellingly, the electromagnetic residue that indicated recent exposure to radar technology. Whatever had happened in the Outer Rim, the humans had emerged victorious. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline form shifted through patterns of deep contemplation as he processed this new information. In his 3,000 years of existence, he had seen countless species rise and fall, had witnessed the birth and death of empires, but he had never encountered a situation quite like this. A species classified as Delta- had somehow eliminated threats that would challenge Beta-class military forces. Perhaps, he said finally, we have underestimated their tactical capabilities. The human ship docked at the diplomatic berth with minimal fanfare, its crew disembarking with the same purposeful efficiency they had displayed during their previous visit. But something had changed. Where before they had moved with the controlled tension of refugees seeking sanctuary, now they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of veterans who had been tested and not found wanting. Sarah Chen looked older than she had 27 days ago. The stress lines around her eyes had deepened, and there was a new hardness in her expression that spoke of decisions made in the crucible of combat. But her step was steady, her bearing proud, and, when she spoke to the council's reception committee, her voice carried an authority that had been forged in fire. We've come to hear the council's decision, she announced without preamble. But, first, you should know that the situation in the Outer Rim has changed. Zethkar stepped forward, his diplomatic training taking precedence over his warrior's curiosity. Explain. 3 raider fleets were operating in the sector where our people are establishing their colony. They saw our civilian transports as easy targets and decided to claim territory that we had already begun to develop. Sarah's expression was neutral, but something in her tone made Zethkar's combat instincts sharpen. They were mistaken. And these raiders? Zelnara inquired, her predatory focus intense. No longer a concern, Sarah replied simply. Their survivors have been offered the choice between departing the sector permanently or facing the consequences of continued aggression. Most chose to leave. The casual way she delivered this information was perhaps more unsettling than any boastful declaration of victory might have been. She spoke of eliminating 3 raider fleets the way another might discuss solving a minor administrative problem. How many ships did you lose? Thorake demanded, his warrior's mind automatically calculating casualty ratios. None. We had some damage, some injuries, but every ship that entered combat returned to base. Sarah met his gaze directly, and, for the first time since their initial meeting, Thorake felt something that his enhanced genetics hadn't prepared him for: doubt. The raiders learned that attacking civilians under our protection has consequences they weren't prepared to pay. The reception committee escorted the human delegation to the council chambers, but this time the atmosphere was markedly different. Word of the humans' recent victories had spread through the station's intelligence networks, and species that had dismissed them as irrelevant Delta-class laborers were now studying them with the focused attention usually reserved for potential threats. The Grand Council chamber was packed when the session convened. Representatives from across the galaxy had arrived to witness what many were already calling the most significant challenge to council authority in 3 millennia. The humans' reputation had undergone a radical transformation in less than a month, from harmless refugees to something that defied easy classification. High Counselor Vextar activated the translation matrix and addressed the assembly with the measured authority of absolute power, but those who knew him well could detect subtle changes in his mental patterns, uncertainty where once there had been only confidence, calculation where before there had been simple dismissal. Human Sarah Chen, you return to us at the appointed time. The council has deliberated on your words and your claims. We offer you a choice that has never before been extended to a species of your classification. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, her small delegation arrayed behind her in the same defensive formation they had maintained during their first visit. But, now that formation didn't seem like the desperate bravado of the outmatched, it looked like the practiced positioning of soldiers who had learned to trust each other in combat. We're listening, she said simply. Vextar's crystalline form shifted through patterns that indicated the gravity of what he was about to propose. Single combat between champions. Your finest warrior against ours. Victory determines your species classification within galactic civilization. The terms themselves were straightforward, but the implications were staggering. The Council was offering to stake its entire hierarchical system on the outcome of individual combat, something that had never been done in galactic history.
If our champion wins, Sarah clarified, what exactly does that mean for our people?
Alpha class status. Full membership in the Council with all attendant rights and territories. Your species would join the ranks of the galaxy's governing powers. A murmur rippled through the chamber.
Alpha class status was not granted, it was earned through millennia of demonstrated superiority. The offer to provide it based on single combat was so unprecedented that many representatives struggled to process its implications. And, if we lose? You accept Delta class classification permanently.
Your people are relocated to appropriate facilities and integrated into galactic civilization according to their capabilities. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Zethkar found himself studying her expression with the focused intensity of a tactical analyst.
She was weighing the offer, considering implications that went far beyond the immediate choice.
When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been amusement. You're betting your entire civilization on the assumption that genetic enhancement and technological superiority are more powerful than fighting for something you love.
We are demonstrating that strength has objective meaning, Thorake interjected, rising from his seat in the Alpha tier. Physical capability, reflexes, endurance, weapon skills, these can be measured and compared. Your philosophical concepts cannot overcome 3 million years of evolutionary advantage.
Sarah looked up at him, this massive warrior whose species had conquered half a dozen star systems through pure military might, and smiled with the same quiet confidence that had unsettled the Council during their first meeting.
Marshal Thorake, she said, are you volunteering to be the Council's champion?
I am, he replied without hesitation. I have fought in over 1,000 battles, have defeated warriors from dozens of species, have never known defeat in personal combat. I carry weapons forged from stellar cores and armor that has turned aside the fury of supernovas. Against me, your champion has no chance.
That remains to be seen, Sarah replied.
But, before we accept your challenge, you should understand something about how humans choose their champions. The chamber fell silent, waiting for her to explain. You've selected your greatest warrior, your most enhanced and experienced fighter, your ultimate expression of martial perfection. You've chosen based on strength, skill, and the tools of war.
Sarah paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. We choose differently. Explain, Vextar demanded.
Our champion won't be our strongest soldier or our most experienced fighter.
Our champion will be someone fighting for something more important than victory. Someone who represents what we're willing to die to protect.
She gestured to her companions, and, for the first time, the Council representatives really looked at them. James Reeves, still showing signs of his recent injuries but standing with the quiet confidence of someone who had held formation against impossible odds. Maria Santos, whose age should have disqualified her from any meaningful combat but who had proven that experience could overcome physical limitations. Tommy Park, barely out of adolescence but carrying himself with the bearing of someone who had learned that courage was not the absence of fear but action despite it. Lisa Wright, young and slight but with eyes that had seen too much too quickly. Any of them could serve as our champion, Sarah continued. Each has already proven that they're willing to sacrifice everything to protect what they love. Each has faced death and chosen to fight rather than surrender.
The question isn't which of them is the strongest, the question is which of them has the most to fight for. The concept was so alien to the Council's way of thinking that several representatives requested clarification through the translation matrix. The idea of choosing a champion based on emotional investment rather than combat capability was completely outside their experience. Thorake's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Sentiment will not turn aside plasma weapons or provide protection against enhanced reflexes. Your champion, whoever you choose, will face the reality of superior evolution and training. Perhaps, Sarah acknowledged.
But, you should remember something important about humans, Marshall.
We've never chosen our heroes based on their chances of winning. We choose them based on what they're fighting for.
She turned to address the entire chamber, her voice carrying clearly to every tier of the massive space.
We accept your challenge. Our champion will meet yours in the arena according to standard protocols.
But, understand this, when you defeat our champion, you won't just be defeating one human. You'll be defeating the love of a father for his children, the determination of a mother to build a better future, the sacrifice of someone who believes that freedom is worth more than life itself. The words hung in the air like a physical force, and, for a moment, the chamber was absolutely silent. Then, Vextar spoke, his mental voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of unquestioned authority.
The challenge is accepted. Combat will take place in the arena in 72 hours.
Standard protocols apply: personal weapons and armor only, victory by death or surrender. The outcome will determine not only your species classification but will serve as a demonstration to the entire galaxy of the true nature of strength.
Sarah nodded formally. 72 hours. We'll be ready.
As the human delegation departed, leaving the council to contemplate the magnitude of what they had just agreed to, Thorake felt something he had never experienced in his enhanced existence: uncertainty. For the first time in 1,000 battles, he would face an enemy whose strength could not be measured by conventional metrics. The arena awaited, and, with it, a confrontation that would determine whether the galaxy belonged to the genetically perfect or to those who fought with their hearts. In 72 hours, the universe would discover which breed of warrior truly deserved to inherit the stars. The humans had 3 days to choose a champion. The council had the same time to contemplate the possibility that their understanding of strength might be fundamentally flawed. Neither side would emerge from the arena unchanged, but only one would emerge victorious.
The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what happened when love met evolution in single combat.
The arena of Nexus Prime was a marvel of engineering that had hosted the galaxy's most significant combats for over 2 millennia. Carved from a single asteroid and suspended in the gravitational balance point between 2 stars, it could accommodate audiences of up to 10 million beings while maintaining perfect environmental conditions for dozens of different species. Energy barriers provided absolute protection for spectators while ensuring that combatants faced each other without external interference. The chamber itself was a perfect sphere 1 kilometer in diameter, its surface capable of generating any terrain configuration desired. Gravity could be adjusted from 0 to 50 standard units, atmosphere could be modified to support any known form of life, and the entire structure could be reconfigured in minutes to match the homeworld conditions of either combatant.
For the first time in its history, the arena was completely sold out.
Representatives from every major civilization had traveled across the galaxy to witness what was already being called the most significant single combat in galactic history. The outcome would not only determine humanity's fate but would serve as a definitive test of the principles that had governed civilized space for 3,000 years.
Ambassador Zethkar stood in the Alpha observation tier, watching the preliminary ceremonies with a mixture of anticipation and unease that he found deeply unsettling.
His enhanced genetics should have eliminated such uncertain emotions, but the events of the past month had challenged so many assumptions that he was beginning to question fundamental aspects of his existence. Grand Marshal Thorake prepared for combat in the arena's champion chambers with the methodical precision of a master craftsman preparing his tools. His armor was a work of art that had taken decades to perfect, each plate forged from metals that existed only in the cores of dying stars, each joint articulated with precision that allowed superhuman flexibility without sacrificing protection. The entire suit was powered by a microfusion reactor that could sustain him for weeks of continuous combat. His weapons were equally impressive. A plasma sword whose blade could cut through any known material, its energy focused by crystals grown in zero gravity and activated by his own bioelectric field. A projectile weapon that fired rounds accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, guided by targeting systems that interfaced directly with his enhanced nervous system. Energy shields that could turn aside starship weapons, sensors that could track targets across impossible distances, and medical systems that could heal most injuries within minutes. Thorake ran through his final systems checks with the calm efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times before. Every component was functioning at optimal parameters, every system responded with perfect precision. He was, by any objective measure, the most dangerous individual combatant in the galaxy. Yet as he prepared for battle, he found his thoughts returning to the human delegation's words about fighting for something worth dying for. The concept remained alien to his understanding, but he could not entirely dismiss its implications. His own motivations were clear and rational: duty to his species, pride in his abilities, loyalty to the Council's principles.
But, was there something beyond rationality that could overcome 3 million years of evolutionary advantage? The question would be answered shortly.
In the human preparation chamber, a very different kind of discussion was taking place. The 5 members of the delegation sat in a circle, their conversation quiet but intense. They were not discussing tactics or weapons or strategy, they were talking about what mattered most to each of them. James Reeves spoke of his daughter back on Earth, probably dead now but alive in his memory, whose last words to him had been a request to find somewhere safe for other children to grow up. Maria Santos described the garden she planned to plant in their new colony, where vegetables from a dozen human worlds would grow under an alien sun. Tommy Park talked about the engineering school he wanted to establish, where young humans could learn to build ships that would carry their species to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Lisa Wright, youngest of the group at 17, listened to the others with the focused intensity of someone trying to understand adult concepts that were still new to her. When her turn came to speak, her words carried a simplicity that cut through all the complex philosophy and strategy. "I just want us to be free," she said quietly. "I want to live in a universe where humans choose their own path, where we don't have to ask permission to exist, where our children can dream of becoming anything they want to be." Sarah Chan listened to each of them, weighing their words against the magnitude of what lay ahead. The choice of champion had been the subject of intense debate over the past 3 days. Each of her companions had volunteered, each had made compelling arguments for why they should face Thor AK in the arena. James had combat experience and tactical knowledge that might allow him to exploit weaknesses in the Valorian strategy. Maria had the steady nerves and precise control that came from decades of flying ships through impossible conditions. Tommy had the kind of innovative thinking that could turn unexpected solutions into combat advantages. Lisa had the pure determination of youth combined with reflexes unclouded by fear or hesitation. But, as Sarah looked around the circle at these 4 people who had become her family through shared hardship and common purpose, she realized that the choice had already been made. It had been made the moment they walked into the Grand Council chamber and defied 3,000 years of galactic hierarchy. It had been made when they decided that some things were worth more than survival. "I'll be our champion," she said simply. The protest was immediate and unanimous. James argued that she was too valuable to risk, that as their leader she needed to survive regardless of the outcome. Maria pointed out that she had the least combat experience of any of them. Tommy insisted that his youth and reflexes would serve better in single combat. Lisa argued that she had less to lose if things went wrong. Sarah listened to each objection with the patience of someone who had already worked through every argument they could present. When they finished, she spoke with the quiet authority that had carried them across impossible distances and through battles that should have destroyed them. "This isn't about who has the best chance of winning," she explained. "This is about what we represent to the galaxy. Thor AK is their perfect warrior, enhanced, trained, equipped with the finest weapons their civilization can produce. If we send our strongest fighter against him, we're accepting their definition of strength. We're playing by their rules." She stood and walked to the chamber's viewport, looking out at the arena where millions of beings were gathering to witness their confrontation. "But, if I face him, a middle-aged human with no enhancements, basic weapons, and 45 years of ordinary life experience, then we're proving our point. We're demonstrating that there are different kinds of strength, that fighting for love can overcome fighting for dominance." James shook his head. "Sarah, he'll kill you in the first 30 seconds. His reflexes are 10 times faster than human normal, his weapons can penetrate any armor we can provide, his tactical systems can predict and counter any move you might make." "Maybe," she acknowledged. "But killing me won't be the same as defeating me. The galaxy will be watching. They'll see a human woman who refuses to submit, who stands up to their perfect warrior even knowing she can't win. They'll see what we're willing to sacrifice for freedom." "And if you lose?" Maria asked quietly. "If you die in there?" Sarah turned back to face them, and they saw in her expression the same quiet determination that had sustained them through every crisis since leaving Earth. "Then, I die free. And the galaxy learns that there are worse things than death, like living without hope, like accepting that some species are naturally superior to others, like believing that love is weaker than fear." The debate continued for another hour, but everyone in the room knew that Sarah's mind was made up. When the time came to report their choice to the arena's officials, they would present her as humanity's champion. The woman who had led them across the galaxy would face the Council's greatest warrior in single combat.
As the final hour approached, Sarah underwent the traditional champion's preparation.
Her armor was simple ceramic and metal composite, effective against basic weapons but no match for Thorake's stellar forged protection. Her weapons were standard human military issue: a projectile rifle, a plasma sidearm, and a monomolecular blade that could cut through most materials but would shatter against Valerian armor. The medical technicians offered her enhancement drugs that would temporarily increase her speed and strength, but she declined. If humanity was going to prove its point, it would be done without artificial improvement. She would enter the arena as she was a human woman fighting for the freedom of her species. The final rituals were completed in the presence of the Council's observers. Combat protocols were reviewed, victory conditions confirmed, and the arena's systems calibrated for the engagement. Sarah signed the formal combat declaration with the same calm precision she had used to sign deployment orders during their flight from Earth. As she prepared to enter the arena, Ambassador Zethkar approached her with a question that had been troubling him since their first meeting.
"Human Sarah Chen," he said, "may I ask what you expect to accomplish?"
"Even if you somehow achieve victory, you are one species among thousands.
The galaxy is vast, and there are forces that even the Council cannot control. What makes you believe that freedom is possible in such an environment?"
Sarah looked at him with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child.
"Ambassador, you're thinking like a conqueror. You're asking how one species can impose its will on the galaxy. That's not what we want." "Then, what do you want?"
"We want to prove that choice is possible.
That strength comes in different forms.
That the universe is big enough for species that refuse to be classified and categorized and assigned their proper place." She paused, then added, "We want to show other species that they don't have to accept your hierarchy just because it's always existed." The implications of her words hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just fighting for their own freedom, they were fighting to demonstrate that freedom was possible for everyone. Their victory wouldn't just elevate one species, it would shatter the entire foundation of galactic civilization.
"You realize," he said carefully, "that if you succeed, the result will be chaos.
Species throughout the galaxy will question their classifications, demand renegotiation of their status, possibly rebel against established order." Sarah smiled, and Zethkar realized he was looking at the expression of someone who had counted that cost and found it acceptable.
"Maybe.
Or maybe they'll realize that order based on mutual respect is stronger than order based on submission. Maybe they'll discover that free species make better allies than enslaved ones. Maybe the galaxy will learn that diversity of thought and approach makes civilizations stronger, not weaker."
The arena's announcement system activated, calling the combatants to their positions.
Sarah Chen, representing humanity and everything their species believed about the power of love over dominance, walked toward the entrance that would lead her to the most important fight in galactic history. Behind her, she left 4 companions who would become her family, 50,000 refugees who had trusted her to lead them to freedom, and the memory of a dead world whose children deserved a better future among the stars. Ahead of her waited Grand Marshal Thorake, 3 million years of evolutionary perfection, and the weight of 3,000 years of galactic civilization. Between them lay the arena, where 2 different philosophies of strength would meet in single combat, and where the galaxy would learn which breed of warrior truly deserved to shape the future of civilized space. The universe held its breath as the final preparations were completed. In moments, the most significant combat in galactic history would begin.
The arena's environmental systems activated, transforming the sterile combat sphere into a representation of Earth's ancient battlefields, rolling hills under an open sky, with scattered rocks and sparse vegetation that would provide minimal cover for either combatant.
The gravity was set to standard human normal, a concession that would favor Sarah slightly but do nothing to offset Thorake's overwhelming advantages. 10 million beings watched through the arena's broadcast network as 2 figures entered the combat zone from opposite sides. Grand Marshal Thorake strode forward with the confident grace of an apex predator, his massive form radiating power even at rest. His armor caught the artificial sunlight like dark crystal, and the weapon's mag locked to his frame hummed with barely contained energy.
Sarah Chen emerged from the human entrance with none of Thorake's dramatic presence.
She moved with the steady gait of someone who had walked long distances under heavy packs, who had learned that endurance was often more valuable than speed. Her basic armor and standard weapons marked her as what she was, an ordinary human being facing the galaxy's most perfect warrior. The contrast was so stark that several species representatives began adjusting their wagers, confident that the combat would end within minutes. The humans had proven themselves tactically competent against raiders and pirates, but this was different. This was their unenhanced champion against the living embodiment of 3 million years of evolutionary advantage.
High Counselor Vextar's voice resonated across the arena as he formally opened the combat.
Champions of your respective civilizations, you stand in the arena of truth where strength meets strength and only the worthy emerge victorious. Combat begins when the resonance tone sounds and continues until one combatant yields or falls. The outcome will determine not only your species classification but will serve as proof of the principles that govern galactic civilization. The tone rang out across the arena, a pure crystalline note that had opened 1,000 combats over 2 millennia. For a moment after it faded, neither combatant moved. They stood 300 meters apart, studying each other across the artificial landscape. Thor-AK activated his targeting systems and immediately acquired a perfect lock on his opponent. His enhanced reflexes could react to threats in microseconds, his weapons could fire with accuracy measured in millimeters at interplanetary ranges, and his armor could withstand direct hits from ship-mounted weapons. Every tactical analysis confirmed what logic dictated: this would be the shortest combat in arena history. Sarah stood motionless, her rifle held in a ready position but not yet aimed.
She was not running tactical calculations or evaluating weapons systems.
Instead, she was thinking about her daughter who had died in Earth's final environmental collapse, about the garden Maria wanted to plant, about Tommy's dreams of engineering schools, about Lisa's simple desire to be free. She was preparing to fight not with enhanced reflexes or superior technology, but with something Thor-AK had never encountered in 1,000 battles: the absolute certainty that some things were worth dying for.
The first shot came from Thor-AK's plasma sword as he activated its energy blade and began his charge.
The weapon's coherent energy beam could cut through starship armor, and his enhanced legs could carry him across the arena floor at speeds approaching 60 kilometers per hour. He was ending this quickly, decisively, in a way that would demonstrate the futility of challenging the natural order.
Sarah didn't try to match his charge or engage in the kind of dynamic combat that would favor his enhanced abilities.
Instead, she did something that 3 million years of evolution hadn't prepared him for. She stood her ground and began firing with methodical precision. Her first shot struck his armor and deflected harmlessly, as expected.
Her second shot also failed to penetrate his protection.
But she kept firing, placing each round with the careful accuracy of someone who understood that persistence could overcome technology. She aimed for the same point on his chest armor, each impact adding stress to the crystalline matrix, each hit creating microscopic fractures that would eventually compromise the plate's integrity. Thor-AK reached her position and swung his plasma sword in an arc that should have cut her in half. But Sarah had spent 4 decades learning to anticipate the actions of beings stronger and faster than herself, first as a child with older siblings, then as a student competing against enhanced classmates, finally as a leader managing the egos and ambitions of people who could outfight her but couldn't outlast her determination. She ducked under his swing and rolled away, coming up 30 meters distant and immediately resuming her methodical fire. Each shot was placed with deliberate precision, targeting the weakest points in his armor, exploiting the microscopic flaws that even stellar-forged protection couldn't entirely eliminate. Thor-AK pursued with the relentless efficiency of a perfect predator, but something was wrong. His tactical systems had predicted that the human would attempt desperate maneuvers, would try to use terrain or speed or misdirection to overcome his advantages. Instead, she was fighting like someone who had accepted death as inevitable but was determined to make it cost as much as possible. Her rifle fire intensified, and Thor-AK realized with shock that the repeated impacts on his chestplate were actually beginning to degrade its protective capability. No individual shot could penetrate his armor, but the cumulative effect of dozens of precisely placed rounds was creating a weakness that shouldn't have existed. He activated his own ranged weapons and fired a spread of energy bolts that should have vaporized his opponent. Sarah dove behind the nearest cover, a rocky outcrop barely large enough to hide behind, and the energy beams turned stone to plasma around her. When the barrage ended, she emerged and resumed firing with the same methodical precision.
The battle continued for 20 minutes, then 40, then an hour.
Thorake's enhanced systems operated flawlessly, his weapons never missed their targets, his tactical analyses provided perfect solutions to every challenge.
But, somehow, the human woman continued to fight.
She absorbed hits that should have killed her, endured impacts that should have shattered bones, and kept firing with a consistency that defied rational explanation.
Watching from the observation tiers, Ambassador Zefkar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history.
Thorake was winning every individual engagement, landing more shots, dealing more damage, advancing steadily toward inevitable victory. But Sarachen was accomplishing something that no previous arena combatant had managed. She was making the galaxy's perfect warrior work for his triumph. "She's not trying to win," Commander Zelnara observed, her predatory instincts finally understanding what she was seeing.
"She's trying to prove a point."
The realization rippled through the observation tiers as species after species recognized what was happening. Sarachen wasn't fighting to defeat Thorake, she was fighting to demonstrate that courage could stand against perfection, that determination could endure what logic said was impossible, that love could make someone stronger than any enhancement.
Thorake's chest armor finally failed after the 47th precisely placed shot.
The crystalline plate cracked along stress lines that had been building for over an hour, exposing the microfusion reactor that powered his systems. For the first time in 1,000 battles, Grand Marshal Thorake felt something approaching alarm. Sarachen saw the crack appear and shifted her targeting without hesitation. Her next shots were aimed at the exposed reactor, each round precisely calculated to penetrate deeper into the power system that made Thorake's enhancements possible. Thorake charged again, covering the distance between them in seconds, his plasma sword raised for a killing stroke. Sarah met his charge not by evading but by dropping to one knee and placing her final shot directly into his reactor core at point-blank range.
The explosion that followed lit up the arena like a miniature star.
When the glare faded and the smoke cleared, two figures lay motionless on the artificial battlefield.
Thorake's armor was shattered, his weapons destroyed, his enhanced systems offline.
He was alive but unconscious, his perfect genetics having saved him from the reactor explosion that would have killed any unenhanced being. Sarachen lay 10 meters away, her armor cracked, her weapons spent, her body showing the accumulated damage of over an hour of combat against impossible odds. But she was conscious, and when the arena's medical sensors confirmed that Thorake was down and unable to continue, she somehow found the strength to stand. The silence that followed was absolute. 10 million beings across the galaxy watched as a middle-aged human woman stood alone in the arena, having done what 3,000 years of galactic civilization said was impossible. She had faced the perfect warrior and emerged victorious. High Counselor Vextar's voice carried a note of something that might have been wonder as he made the formal announcement: "Combat is concluded.
Victory to the human champion Sarachen." The implications hit the galactic community like a tsunami. Humanity had just won Alpha-class status in single combat.
More importantly, they had proven that the Council's entire classification system was based on incomplete understanding of what made warriors truly dangerous. In the days that followed, the effects rippled outward from Nexus Prime like waves from a dropped stone. Species that had accepted their Delta and Epsilon classifications for millennia began demanding re-evaluation. The rigid hierarchy that had maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years started showing cracks as civilizations realized that strength came in forms the Council had never measured. Sarachen recovered from her injuries in the medical facilities of Nexus Prime, surrounded by her 4 companions who had watched their leader accomplish the impossible. The galaxy's political structure was transforming around them, but their own mission remained simple: they had secured freedom for their species and proved that humans belonged among the stars.
What happens now? Lisa Wright asked during one of Sarah's recovery sessions.
The 17-year-old had spent the week processing the reality that everything she thought she knew about the universe had changed. Sarah looked out through the medical bay's viewport at the stars beyond, thinking of 50,000 humans who were even now building new homes under alien suns, their future secured by a single combat that had redefined the meaning of strength.
"Now we go home," she said simply.
"We help our people build the civilization they deserve. We prove that freedom is worth more than security, that diversity makes us stronger, that love is the most powerful force in the universe." James Reeves, Maria Santos, and Tommy Park nodded in agreement. They had traveled across the galaxy to find freedom, had faced the combined might of galactic civilization, and had emerged victorious. But their greatest victory wasn't the combat in the arena, it was the knowledge that they had shown the universe a different way to be strong. The humans departed Nexus Prime 3 days later, their ship loaded with the territorial grants and resource allocations that came with Alpha-class status. But they left behind something more valuable than any physical reward. They had given the galaxy hope that change was possible, that the natural order wasn't as fixed as everyone believed. In the months that followed, the Galactic Council evolved into something new, a confederation based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical dominance, where species found their roles through choice rather than classification, where strength was measured not by genetic perfection but by what beings were willing to sacrifice for each other. The humans established their colony in the Outer Rim and began the long work of building a civilization based on the principles they had fought to preserve. Their ships carried not conquerors but teachers, engineers, farmers, and dreamers who believed that the universe was vast enough for everyone to find their place among the stars. Ambassador Zethkar visited their colony 5 years later and found something that challenged his understanding even more than their victory in the arena. He found a civilization that had grown strong not through domination or enhancement, but through the simple recognition that every being deserved the chance to choose their own destiny. Standing in Maria Santos's garden, watching human children play alongside the offspring of a dozen different species who had sought refuge in this corner of space where freedom mattered more than classification, Zethkar finally understood what Saracen had tried to teach the galaxy. There were indeed different breeds of warriors. Some fought to conquer, some fought to dominate, some fought to prove their superiority. But the most dangerous warriors were those who fought to protect what they loved, who drew strength not from enhancement or technology but from the simple, revolutionary belief that some things were worth more than life itself. The stars belonged to all who were brave enough to love them, and the galaxy had learned that lesson from a species that refused to accept that strength could ever be measured by anything other than the contents of the heart. In the end, humanity had given the universe the most valuable gift imaginable, the knowledge that freedom was not something to be granted by the strong, but something that belonged to all who were willing to fight for it. And, in fighting for it, they had become the strongest warriors the galaxy had ever seen.